What's up, agency owners? Jason Swenk here with another great episode of the Smart Agency Masterclass, a podcast for the digital agency owner that wants to create more freedom while they're scaling their agency and also have fun doing it. On today's episode, I have a great guest who has been in the agency space for quite a while, and they do CFO services. And we're going to talk about which are the levers that we need to pull in order to figure out how can we change that one engagement to something very profitable. What are the things to look for? How can we get our agency to a more profitable place? Because a lot of times as we're scaling our agency, we keep adding more and more people, but our profit keeps going down. And I don't want to see that. I don't think Russell wants to see that either. So let's go ahead and jump into the episode. Hey, Russell, welcome to the show.
So great to be here, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So briefly, in under a couple seconds, tell us who you are and what do you do?
My name is Russell Benaroya. I am the owner of Stride Services. We provide outsourced bookkeeping, accounting, and fractional CFO support for digital agencies, period.
Awesome. I love it. I love when people are really short and quick. So let's talk about what have you been seeing in the agency world? You've been working with lots of agency owners over the past couple of years, through COVID and through a lot of different ups and downs. Where's everything headed? What can we do to make things better?
Yeah. Well, in a bull environment, a rising tide raises all boats. So there's a lot of room to be a little bit sloppy when you make hay when the sun is shining, right? And that generally exists in the agency space as it does in many other industries. We are at a really interesting moment, though, and a moment of opportunity and transition where it's not quite about making hay when the sun is shining. It is about getting quite judicious with understanding the types of customers you have, the engagements that you've signed, and really the most important thing is the relative level of profitability on those engagements, because the preparation in front of us is to be informed and armed to make smart decisions going into an environment that is less certain. And these are the types of conversations that we're having right now, and our being a guide and a support structure is important.
How can the agency owners listening, what are some of the things that they need to look for in order to make smart decisions? Like which are the levers they need to pull or be aware of?
One of the challenges, certainly when it comes to the financial side of the business, is that financial information, when looking back through the rearview mirror, isn't particularly telling to many agency owners. It's like Greek. It's a statement, but what does it really tell me about how I need to act or want to act around a particular engagement? And so you have to keep peeling back the layers to get to a level of client or engagement level profitability, which is to have information that not only informs, well, how much revenue are we generating for this client, but maybe most important, what are the costs that we're putting against this client, time, direct expenses, so that we can look and say, it's a big client, we're generating a lot of revenue, but is it hitting our profitability threshold? And if it is, or if it isn't, not, oh no, I'm freaking out, but why is that the case? It is an impetus for curiosity and questions. And when we talk about levers is knowing at a client level, I have information from which to start asking questions and take action.
So what's the first step in evaluating to see if, a client's profitable or not? Because I can't tell you how many times I talk to an agency owner who's like, man, we've been growing substantially, but our profitability has been going down. And then they always go to me when they start looking, they go, my biggest client is not profitable, but I need to keep them because it pays payroll. And I'm like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
I'm going to share with you two techniques or tactics we can use. So one is the aggregation of financial and time data into an analytics repository or data warehouse, which is something that we provide at Stride. So let's say you're time tracking in Harvest and you have some direct expenses that are sitting in QuickBooks Online, as well as your revenue. What we do is bring that into a unified environment. So, and then quantify what is the value of that time that is being expended on that account. And when we pull all that information together, it's a lot easier and obvious what level of customer profitability is at the engagement level. That's technique number one. Technique number two, and this is going to be relevant for the agencies that are on retainer-based agreements or MRR, subscription, monthly recurring revenue subscription arrangements, is to look at something called your shadow bill rate. And so your shadow bill rate is essentially a fairly easy calculation that says, well, what is that monthly recurring revenue that I charge the client every month? Good to know. And that numerator, denominator, what would I be billing if I were, I'm not, if I were billing hourly at a bill rate that is commensurate with the level of resources that I'm putting against that client. And that ratio, we call it the win for all. The win for all ratio is a indication of whether or not your MRR is sufficient to keep or manage to a level of profitability for the business. And by the way, there are a whole bunch of reasons why your ratio may be low. That's not all about your poor pricing. It could also be about poor process.
Yeah, exactly. And what other things can we look for? Because, when I talk to an agency owner, and one of the things I look at is going, all right, how many legacy clients do you have? And are they on legacy pricing? And a lot of times they're almost half under what they're currently billing now. And I always tell them, dude, there's a huge opportunity cost. Like literally, why are the rates at this rate versus the ones coming in? Are you finding when you're going through a lot of the agency's books and everything that's very similar across the board? And what are you recommending to them for them to do?
Yeah. The answer is yes, and it's very common, and it has actually nothing to do with business and everything to do with ourselves as humans and our aversion to conflict. Where we tend to generally be a bit conflict averse. And so it makes it very hard for us to go to a client and say, hey, we're 30% under water and we've got to increase your price. In fact, what we try to do, Jason, is we try to over service them so that they'll be super happy. And then when they're super happy, we can then go to them and increase their price. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, I've been waiting for you. I'm so happy you're now here to increase my price. That never has happened in the history of the world. And so what the work is, and this is, by the way, where accounting and humanity intersect, is helping to guide the business owner on a methodology or framework to be able to go to that client and have what I call a state of the relationship discussion that allows the parties to clear context. Hey, how are we feeling about this? Before we jump into clearing content, which is we're 30% underwater. That's the work. There isn't magic, but it is flexing a muscle that most of us aren't particularly exercised.
Yeah. What's one thing, if you only had to track one thing in an agency, what would it be and why?
I'm going to get back to that golden metric or the win for all ratio. I think that harnesses the most, and again, this is more for recurring based revenue modalities for how you price. I think that captures the most elegant piece of information in one single metric that forces you to ask the following. Did we just price this client incorrectly? It's fair. Do we have some process problems on our side that we can now double click and look into to understand how we can improve efficiency? And then number three is, Are there some issues on the client side that are keeping us from being as efficient and effective for that client as possible that we can probe and determine how to fix? I think it is the driver upon how so many smart business decisions can be addressed and resolved. And by the way, we eat our own dog food. We are a MRR. We are a managed service for just for accounting versus managed service for agency work. We That is the one metric we measure.
When you talk about monthly recurring revenue, there's most agencies are going to that. Back in my day, we were 80% projects, which I wish I could have switched, but we just had such a healthy pipeline, and there wasn't as much kind of all this kind of productization out there. When you're looking at the monthly reoccurring revenue, when you discover that you're getting killed in scope creep from the client on the client side, and you have a bad process, what's the best way to go to that client that you've seen in order to make that adjustment to make that account extremely profitable?
Yeah. Well, you can imagine that it's particularly hard if you don't have the data to support that client is out of scope. And so there's legacy and then there's going forward. The legacy is really about saying, well, here's where we started. Here are the services that we laid out. And again, think fifth grade level here. Let's not get overly sophisticated. So here's the scope of what we agreed to in the original statement of work. Here's what it is we're doing today. There is a delta here, and these are facts. There are facts. So first is indisputable facts. The second thing to do with the client is say, and I make up a story about what I'm looking at here that we are operating out of scope and you just aren't aware of it. And I have a responsibility that I haven't come to you and discussed this with you yet. Now, the client may say, well, I have a story that actually this is in scope, is in scope. And so I think that's where the legacy issue creates a little bit of an emotional engagement that we want to try to mitigate. Again, starting with facts is always good. But the answer to solve this going forward is to stop looking at the service that you provide as a service and to look at it as a product. And a product has standards. And if you articulate those standards and how you architect your statement of work and get really clear about what are the tasks associated with that product that you've sold, then it's a lot easier objectively to evaluate whether or not actions that your agency is taking are inside or outside of that product that you've created. It's a different orientation, but a really objective way to be unemotional about work that is outside of what you committed to.
I like that. What's the general average now that you're seeing for profitability, like a profitability margin? Is it 20%, 30%, 10%? What's the average that you're seeing in the agency space?
Yep. So let me distinguish between gross margin and operating margin. So gross margin, we're really targeting looking at somewhere between 50 to 55% gross margin. So gross margin, revenue minus direct costs associated with serving that customer. And again, it ranges, but if you're at about a 50%, 55% gross margin business, that's a good target. What we typically see is then operating expenses defined as below the line, below gross profit. Think of operating expenses as the container that you have built to just deliver the service that you've promised to the marketplace. It's your facility, it's your executive compensation, it's your insurance, legal, et cetera. That's typically or targeted around about 30%. So target operating profit 20 to 25% operating profit is a strong objective to measure your performance against. And we help clients do that fairly visually, so it's unambiguous.
What's a good, and I agree with that too. My target for everyone's always over 30%. I always kind of look at that as kind of the average of a lot of the agency owners that we have in our mastermind is around that. And we're constantly going, well, how can we improve that? And also too, I tell people, look, if you're in an investing year and you're building the business, it's okay to go down. And right, it just depends on when you want to get to a point where you can actually have the opportunity to sell it. Like kind of 2 years out is when you really want that number to start going back up. So don't freak out if the number's really, really low. But if you're not paying yourself a good salary too, like, why don't you talk about that a little bit? Like how people try to mess with that. They barely pay themselves so they can get up to that 30% margin.
Yeah. Bad idea. Again, speaking from experience here, if I were representing my spouse right now, she would say, Russell, why don't you ever just pay yourself what you're worth? Because it's like killing you. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to. But it's an artificial. That's an artificial achievement. It doesn't truly represent the business that you're building. So I wouldn't recommend that. You made a great point, by the way, about the difference in profit margin when factoring in what I call growth investments. And I do think it's very healthy and worthwhile to be able to identify if somebody came to you and said, hey, tell me how much in growth investment expense you're incurring a month, to be able to say, well, we're incurring about $40,000 a month of growth investments. Here's where they are. If I had to stop that right now, I know what I would do. If I excluded those out, we're at about a 20% operating margin business. That is super important psychologically, because otherwise people tend to look at their income statement and say, oh my gosh, why am I losing money? Well, yeah, because I'm investing and I'm doing that consciously, but we sometimes forget that. And I think that can throw the psychology of a business owner off if they can't bifurcate those two expense categories.
Oh, awesome. Well, this has been amazing, Russell. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you think would benefit the agency owner listening in?
Jason, I think the thing I would say that we've learned over the last couple of years as we've introduced ourselves into agencies and served them, say, from their core bookkeeping all the way up to CFO, is that the way that agencies are billing today, contract design, the way that they're capturing data, the way that they want to use that data, it's complex. So what I would say is it's not just bookkeeping and accounting, it's technology, it's process, it's advisory, it's analytics. Meaning when we think about that back office relationship or partnership, what we're seeing is that it's a lot of components coming together to serve holistically. And more than anything else, it usually starts with, let's map the right process. Let's not use technology to cover up a broken process. And that's really where the work starts.
Awesome. And what's the website they can go and check you guys out?
Thanks, Jason. It is www.stride.services. Stride.services. Check us out. Love to spend time with you.
Awesome. And if you guys enjoyed this episode and you want to be around amazing people, because it's very lonely in the agency world, and maybe you want to run ideas through other agency owners that are currently going through this, or you'd want to see what's working for other people, or have someone be able to look at your business and go, holy cow, we can see the things, because it's, you can't see the forest through the trees, right? I'd love for all of you to go to digitalagencyelite.com. Check that out. It might be the resource that you're looking for. It's an amazing community of the best agency owners in the world. Go to digitalagencyelite.com. And until next time, have a swank day.